There's something you do almost every single day without giving it a second of thought. You pour it into your tea, splash it onto your cereal, hand it to your children without checking the label once because why would you? It's milk. It comes from a cow, goes into a carton, ends up in your fridge. You've trusted it your entire life, and so has the NHS, and so have British farmers, and so has every school canteen across this country. But stand in any major UK supermarket and actually look at that chilled aisle. Not glance, really look. What you'll find isn't simple anymore. You'll find sugar-loaded drinks dressed in dairy colours sitting beside plain milk on the same shelf, implying a nutritional equivalence they have absolutely no right to claim. You'll find premium-priced cartons selling you more industrial processing and calling it purity. You'll find a plant-based brand whose advertising was banned by the UK's Advertising Standards Authority for misleading environmental claims. 6 of the most purchased products in that fridge section are not what they appear to be. And the quiet confidence most people bring to that aisle, the "it's just milk" assumption, is precisely what makes each one of them work. Before you put anything in your basket this week, you need to know what's actually in your hand. Real milk has one ingredient. That's not a philosophy, it's a historical fact. For most of human history, the only question about milk was where it came from and how fresh it was. Pasteurization arrived in Britain in the late 19th century to protect against tuberculosis and other pathogens, and that was largely the end of the story. One ingredient, kept cold, sold close to its source. That is not what the modern UK dairy aisle is selling you. 6 brands represent these problems clearly. 2 do not. Let's go through them one by one. Brand 1, Yazoo flavoured milk. Start with the one most likely to be in your child's lunchbox right now, Yazoo. The branding is deliberate and it works. Bright, friendly colours, a milk bottle logo suggesting dairy heritage, language around "made with British milk," positioning it firmly as a wholesome choice. For many parents, that framing is completely persuasive because the assumption is that if it's milk-based, the rest of the label is detail. The detail is where the problem lives. The chocolate variety contains approximately 10.5 grams of sugar per 100 milliliters. For context, Coca-Cola contains around 10.6 grams of sugar per 100 milliliters. Per 100 milliliters, they are essentially the same sugar density. But the comparison becomes sharper when you look at what you actually drink. A standard 500 milliliters Yazoo carton, the size sold at most checkouts, newsagents, and school canteens, contains around 52 grams of total sugar. A standard 330 milliliters can of Coca-Cola contains around 35 grams. The Yazoo carton delivers nearly 50% more total sugar than the can of Coke, in the serving people actually consume. Beyond the sugar, the ingredient list includes artificial flavorings, stabilizers, and additives that have no business being filtered through a "it's milk-based, it's fine" assumption. The problem is not that a flavored drink exists. The problem is where it sits and what its positioning implies. Designed to be picked up by someone who trusts the dairy section as a health-safe zone, Yazoo exploits that trust without ever quite lying outright. It contains milk. It's just also something considerably closer to a soft drink than anyone reaching for it in the school snack aisle is likely to realize. Brand 2, Fridge Thick Milkshake. If Yazoo represents the gateway problem, Fridge is what happens when nobody pulls the handbrake. Fridge is a Muller brand. You'll know Muller from yogurts, corner pots, and breakfast aisles across the country. They understand dairy marketing thoroughly, and Fridge demonstrates it. The thick milkshake positioning technically frames this as an indulgent treat, which would be an honest framing, except it's stocked in the same chilled dairy section as plain milk, sold in formats designed for regular consumption rather than occasional indulgence. Depending on the variant, Fridge contains approximately 11 to 13 grams of sugar per 100 milliliters. The standard 471 milliliters bottle, the one you'll find at service stations and supermarket fridges across the country, delivers somewhere between 50 and 60 grams of sugar in a single serving. The NHS recommended daily maximum for free sugars in adults is 30 grams. One bottle of Fridge clears that ceiling by a significant margin, and most people drinking it aren't thinking of it in those terms at all. The ingredient list also includes thickeners, stabilizers, and artificial flavoring. None of those would appear in any milk a traditional dairy farmer would recognize. The thickeners, in particular, create a texture specifically engineered to feel substantial and satisfying to make the experience feel more than it nutritionally is. Fridge is a dessert. That's not a criticism of its existence. It's a criticism of the shelf it lives on. and the assumptions that shelf quietly manufactures. Brand 3 Cravendale Filtered Fresh. The first two brands were at least honest in a narrow technical sense. Flavoured milk and thick milkshake are printed on the label if you look. The next one is more interesting because the deception is built directly into the premium pricing and into a word most people read as meaning more natural rather than more industrial. That word is filtered. Cravendale's marketing has long centered on filtering as a signifier of purity, cleaner, fresher, better milk. The packaging is restrained and quality signaling, consistently suggesting that what you're paying extra for represents something closer to the source, something less tampered with than the carton beside it. Here is what microfiltration actually involves. Milk is passed under pressure through ceramic membrane filters to remove bacteria and microorganisms. The result is milk with a dramatically reduced microbial count and an extended refrigerated shelf life, typically 10 to 14 days after opening, compared to roughly 7 to 10 days for standard pasteurized milk. That is what you are paying the premium for. Not purity in the sense of simplicity or naturalness, not fewer processing steps or a closer relationship with the farm. You are paying for milk that has undergone more industrial processing than the cheaper carton beside it, and you are being charged more for the privilege because the marketing language makes more processing sound like less. One other thing worth knowing, Cravendale is an Arla brand. Arla is a Danish agricultural cooperative. Not a British heritage brand, despite everything the calm countryside flavoured packaging might quietly suggest. The product is safe, and the milk is entirely fine. The issue is purely what the marketing is doing with your assumptions about what the word filtered should mean. Brand 4 UHT Long Life Milk. Ultra-high temperature milk UHT sits in the ambient aisle rather than the chilled section. No refrigeration required until opening. Shelf life of 6 months, often considerably longer. Brands like Lactel and various supermarket own-label versions dominate this space, and they serve a genuine purpose. Let's establish that clearly. UHT milk is safe. For people without reliable refrigeration, for emergency cupboard stock, for food service environments and catering, it is a legitimate and useful product category. The problem is something quieter than safety. It's what happens when UHT gets treated as a nutritional equivalent to fresh pasteurized milk, which, in hospital kitchens, school canteens, office tea stations, and countless domestic cupboards across the UK, it routinely and invisibly is. What UHT processing actually involves is heating milk to between 135 and 150 degrees Celsius for 2 to 4 seconds. That level of heat is effective at commercial sterilization and shelf extension. It is less effective at leaving heat-sensitive vitamins intact. Peer-reviewed food science research has consistently documented reductions in riboflavin, vitamin B12, folate, and thiamine in UHT milk compared to fresh, pasteurized equivalents. These aren't catastrophic losses, but they are measurable reductions in nutrients that people rely on milk to deliver, particularly children and elderly people, for whom dairy is a significant daily dietary source. There's also the taste. That faint cooked, slightly caramelized quality that most people have noticed but never quite named, that's the Maillard reaction, a chemical interaction between proteins and sugars triggered by intense heat. Most people actively avoid UHT when fresh is available. The issue is all the contexts where the choice is being made for them, without anyone mentioning that what's in the carton is nutritionally a step down from what they assume they're getting. Brand 5 Oatly Oat Drink. Now we reach the brand that may have executed the most sophisticated act of image management in the modern British food market. Oatly didn't just build a product, it built a cultural identity. Choosing Oatly became shorthand for a certain kind of consumer, environmentally conscious, health-aware, forward-thinking. The packaging was deliberately self-aware, anti-corporate in tone, designed to feel like it came from somewhere honest. The coffee shop presence made it aspirational. People who had never previously spent a moment reading a food label became genuinely invested in which milk their barista was reaching for. So let's actually read the label. Oatly Barista Edition ingredients: oats, water, rapeseed oil, dipotassium phosphate, acidity regulators. Protein content: approximately 0.5 to 1 gram per 100 milliliters, compared to around 3.5 grams per 100 milliliters in whole cow's milk. If you are replacing dairy milk in your daily routine with Oatly and not compensating through other dietary sources, You are taking a meaningful step down in protein intake that no part of the Oatly brand experience is going to draw your attention to. The rapeseed oil, an industrial fat, is also an ingredient that most people buying into the oat milk concept would not expect to find listed there. Then there is the regulatory record. In July 2021, the UK's Advertising Standards Authority banned Oatly advertising after ruling that specific environmental claims made in their campaign were misleading and could not be substantiated. This was not a minor footnote. This was the UK's primary advertising watchdog ruling that a company whose entire brand architecture was built on environmental responsibility had made claims it could not defend. And then there was the Blackstone investment. When it emerged that Oatly had accepted substantial investment from a fund associated with Blackstone, an entity with significant holdings in areas the brand's most loyal customers directly opposed the sense of betrayal among exactly the consumers Oatly had cultivated most carefully, was sharp and well documented. The gap between the story the brand told and the company it turned out to be was wider than any of the marketing had acknowledged. To be entirely clear, oat milk and plant-based alternatives have genuine value for people who cannot or choose not to consume dairy. The product is not dangerous. The problem is not its existence. The problem is the story it told, while building the price point and the loyalty it commands. Brand 6. A2 Milk. The final brand on this list is the most quietly clever, because it didn't reach for lifestyle branding or environmental positioning. It built its argument on science, proper-sounding, peer-reviewed technical science. And that makes it considerably harder to question at the shelf. A2 Milk arrives in UK supermarkets at a premium of roughly 30 to 40% over standard whole milk. The premise: conventional dairy cows produce milk containing both A1 and A2 beta-casein proteins, whereas A2 milk comes specifically from cows selectively bred to produce only the A2 variant. The marketed benefit is that this makes the milk easier to digest and gentler on the stomach than ordinary dairy. Here is the important distinction. The underlying biology is real. A1 and A2 beta-casein are genuinely different proteins, and there is a body of research examining whether A1 protein contributes to digestive discomfort in certain individuals. Some studies do suggest a meaningful link for people who are specifically sensitive to A1 beta-casein. The science is not invented. What the science does not clearly support is the broader implication that most people drinking ordinary milk are experiencing a problem that A2 milk would solve. The evidence for significant benefit in the general adult population is limited. The studies with the clearest findings involve people with existing digestive sensitivity, which is a real subset but substantially smaller than the brand's framing implies. For the majority of people buying A2 milk in British supermarkets, current evidence does not justify the premium with any particular confidence. What has happened here is precise and effective. A real but narrow finding has been used as the foundation for a much broader claim. By implying ordinary milk is harder on your system without quite stating it directly, the brand manufactures a problem and positions itself as the solution. It's scientifically adjacent, it's never outright dishonest, and it will cost you an extra £1 or more every single time you fill your fridge. Brand 7 Yo Valley Organic Whole Milk, the first good one. 6 brands, 6 distinct ways of using packaging, positioning, or scientific language to put distance between what you're buying and what you believe you're buying. But the entire point of going through this was never to leave you standing in front of a fridge with nowhere to reach, so let's talk about what actually deserves to be there. Yo Valley Organic is a family farm business from Somerset, and it is the UK's largest organic dairy brand. Organic certification in this country carries verified requirements: no synthetic pesticides or routine antibiotics, mandatory access to outdoor pasture, higher animal welfare standards, and a predominantly grass-based diet for the cows. These are not marketing claims, they are certified, independently audited conditions. And those conditions produce nutritionally distinct milk. A 2016 study published in the British Journal of Nutrition, drawing on European data, found that organic milk contains significantly higher levels of omega-3 fatty acids than conventionally produced milk. Organic milk also shows higher concentrations of conjugated linoleic acid, a naturally occurring fat that has generated consistent research interest for its health associations. These are percentage differences rather than transformative amounts, but across a product consumed daily over years, the cumulative picture carries real weight. Full-fat milk also delivers fat-soluble vitamins A, D, and K, too, in a form that requires dietary fat to be properly absorbed. Choosing full fat isn't the cardiovascular risk it was once assumed to be. The Pura study, published in The Lancet in 2018, and drawing on data from 21 countries, found no association between full-fat dairy consumption and increased cardiovascular risk. The old low-fat consensus is being seriously re-examined, and has been for several years now. The ingredient list for Yo Valley Organic Whole Milk, that is all it says. Brand 8 full-fat British Farm pasteurized milk. The principle: Yo Valley is the named recommendation, but the more important point is what it represents, because Yo Valley won't be on every shelf you visit, and organic dairy isn't within every budget. The good news is that you don't need the premium brand to make a genuinely sound choice. The principle is this: full-fat, fresh, pasteurized, British-sourced milk with no added ingredients. That's the entire standard. Everything else being discussed in that aisle is noise relative to those 4 criteria. If you can get to a farm shop or a farmer's market, do. Locally produced, full-fat milk from a named farm is as close to the source as you'll get in modern Britain, and it's frequently more affordable than people assume. If you're in a supermarket, look for the red tractor label or the British Farm Standard logo. Both indicate British-sourced dairy with verified basic welfare and production standards. Own brand whole milk from any major supermarket, if it is fresh, pasteurized and British farmed, is a perfectly sound daily choice. It doesn't need to cost more, it doesn't need a clever name. And if you're ever uncertain in the aisle, apply 3 questions. Does it need to stay refrigerated? Does it carry a best before date within the next week to 10 days? Does the ingredients list read only whole milk? If the answer to all 3 is yes, you have found it. It won't have an aspirational logo or a scientific claim on the front. It will just be milk, which, after everything we've just been through, should feel like exactly the right answer. 6 brands. And when you lay the pattern out plainly, the underlying logic connecting all of them becomes hard to ignore. Some are hiding substantial sugar inside. Trusted, child-friendly dairy packaging, counting on parents never looking past the front label. One is charging a premium for more industrial processing dressed up in language implying the opposite. One built an entire consumer movement on environmental claims that the UK's own advertising watchdog ruled could not be substantiated. And one took a narrow, real piece of science and quietly stretched it into a premium that current evidence does not broadly justify. Different strategies. The same structural logic. The dairy aisle operates on deep, almost unexamined trust. And in a corporate food system, that kind of trust tends to get leveraged rather than honored. What you now have is straightforward. A short ingredients list is a reliable signal. A natural refrigerated shelf life is a reliable signal. A British farm source, verifiable through a recognized certification scheme, is a reliable signal. A carton telling you it's been filtered for purity, or that it's easier on your digestion, or that choosing it makes you a more responsible person without the evidence behind any of it is a reason to read more carefully before reaching. Milk spent several thousand years being a single ingredient. The only reason it became complicated is that complexity creates margin, builds brand architecture, and gives marketing departments something to do. The simplicity wasn't a limitation, it was the point. The most straightforward choices in that aisle are frequently the most honest ones. Your fridge, your money, your decision. Just make it an informed one.